Welcome to the ERP session, ERP webinar series, A Bridge Over Troubled Waters. This session is a two of three on how to plan your ERP web dream. I'm Joe Wilkins with Missouri Enterprise, the state's NIST MEP Center. Our purpose here at Missouri Enterprise is to support manufacturers to help them grow in our state, and we do that through a variety of solutions such as business planning, industry certifications, continuous improvement, technology assessments, and much more. The state's MEP Center, it means we are connected to the national network of manufacturing experts. So whatever you need, we can fill it. And being a part of this network allows us to be impact driven, so to keep us in the business of supporting and helping manufacturers succeed. And we rely on surveys to help us keep us going. So once at the end of today's webinar, survey link, it will be available through the chat. We ask you to take this opportunity to fill out that survey. It's about 10 questions. Then in a few months, NIST will follow up with their own survey to gather information on how you benefit from today's event and the impact that's happened to provide you and your company. So with that being said, now I'm going to turn over to Tom for the session on planning your ERP dream. Tom? Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning. Last week we talked about the dream, yeah? What we wanted to do. Today we're going to discuss how to do it. Now, a word of warning really first. Take a lesson from Captain Smith of the Titanic. Don't charge into anything. What he did was he wanted to get across the Atlantic as fast as possible, and he charged forward into the ocean and ran into an iceberg. Not good. So think about the metaphorical icebergs that you may run into. Take time to think about what we're going to do. So if you remember the law of diffusion of innovation, we talked about this. Last week it was the dream, the why we want to do it. We went through all the top management reasons why you'd want to do an ERP system. Today we're going to talk about how we realize the dream, the plan, how you select a system. And then next week in webinar 3, we're going to talk about how you implement it. But first off, let's mention project management. This is a big project. Change is very difficult in every organization. It's not something you want to do lightly. And the best way to address this, particularly a big project like an ERP implementation, is using some of the standard methodologies. The PMBOK 6th edition, the Institute of Project Managers, is, in my opinion, the best guide to actually doing a large project. I've used this all over the world. ISO has got a standard, of course, 1006, guidelines for quality management in projects, which is good to refer to. However, sometimes worse gets worse. Therefore, Missouri Enterprise applies the PMBOK to all ERP projects. So the first consideration, people. The great Ollie White pointed out that well-trained, enthusiastic people can make a lousy system fly. What we're going to focus today is to make sure we don't get a lousy system, but we still have enthusiastic and well-trained people. So if you look at the triangle, the inverted triangle on the right, the system is at the bottom. What you do with the data is next, but at the top is the people. Never, ever, ever forget about the people. If you do, you'll fail. Then you decide what you want it to do. ERP comes in many, many varieties. A good integrated system will touch everybody in the organization. Supply chain and vendor management, any projects, HR, hiring people, training people, manufacturing, production, service management and delivery. And delivery, of course, at this moment in history is a big problem because we can't get truck drivers. So you need to be able to deliver your product. Finance and accounting, very important. You want to be able to have your financial records 8 o'clock the morning after the financial period closes. You don't want to wait 6 weeks to see if you've made money. Customer relationship management. You want to be able to give your customers a service. And particularly if you're going to allow your customers to place orders online, you want to make sure that is as simple as possible. So, where do you start? The place to start is a project charter. Developing the project charter. This is what you're going to do. This is the authority, if you like, the signpost of system selection. And I'll refer you to the PM book guide, 6th edition. Typically the inputs, looking at the business case, environmental factors, the organization process assessments, and then some of the tools you're going to use in the project charter. Expert judgment, data gathering, brainstorming, focus groups, user interviews, and don't forget the users, team skills, conflict management, all this sort of stuff, management of meetings. You know, how many of us spend so much time in meetings, we're really looking for a rope so we can go and hang ourselves outside. And then the outputs from the project charter. A signed, agreed project charter with a sponsor, top management, a list of the assumptions that we're making, and of course the death threats. Never ever forget the death threats. Being a natural born pessimist, I always look for the death threats. Risk analysis is a very important part in project management. Very important part as well is focus. Top management must not lose focus. The people in the steering committee do not lose focus. And what we're going to talk about for a moment is the steering committee. It's said that a camel is a horse designed by a committee. And to some extent this is true. Everybody jumps in, the people with the loudest voices or the people with the most persuasive biases get their way. We can't have this. You've got to avoid the problem by a detailed and communicated project charter. Unless you get a camel. I mean, you may want a camel, but generally you do not want a camel. So there's a few cardinal rules for steering committees. First off, do not get fascinated by the clevers. Avoid getting attack of the clevers. As one of my old mentors used to say, don't get clever. Keep it simple. Focus on what you're going to do. Do not copy the work of others. Those of you who've read Deming, Out of the Crisis, know on page 129, he specifically states, do not copy. Others will pre-publish and preach what they did yesterday, but not what they're going to do tomorrow. What you need to do is understand your processes, because every organization is different. Whatever people say, every organization is different. Now, an example, all aircraft obey the same laws of physics, but you would never confuse an F-35 with a Boeing Dreamliner, would you? But they all obey the same laws of physics, and all manufacturing industry are the same, except they're all different. And you've got to understand the differences in your organization. And we talked yesterday last week, about the manufacturing environment, whether you're engineer to order, manufacturer to order, assemble to order, manufacture to stock. This will impact on your system. So, it may be useful to consider at the moment why teams fail. Absence of trust. If top management do not trust the team to make a sensible decision. The fear of conflict. You always get conflict in teams. Team development is in 4 distinct phases, and this is well documented. The forming, everybody's pleased to be on the team. And then the storming process, where you think, oh, I don't like that person. I mean, Why doesn't he wash every day? And then the next stage is norming, where you think, well, he may not wash every day, but you know, he does wash his hands after going to the bathroom. And the final phase is performing. And this is when a team really works together. And if you think you can go from forming to performing in a couple of hours, you're deluding yourself. So fear of conflict in teams, it always happens. Lack of commitment. People have got other jobs to do. Selecting a system is job number 2. Service to the customer is job 1. Avoidance of accountability. We're going to talk about a system requirements document later this morning. And one of the things I always do in a system requirements document is once we agree it, everybody signs it. I agree to this. Because if you don't do that, 5 years down the road, somebody will say, well, I never agreed to that. That's a load of rubbish. You've got to have accountability. And you've got to think about the results. What do we try to achieve? So, the anatomy of a steering committee. You must have a top management sponsor. Top management must not lose focus on what we're doing. Then it's also a good idea to have a facilitator. The problem with a lot of committees is everybody has got opinions and they all want to voice their opinions. Well, if you have a committee of any reasonable size, you're going to spend the rest of your life arguing about whether you put sugar or sweetener in the coffee. So you've got to have a facilitator, and a good facilitator will guide the committee, will make sure that everybody has got a say, everybody is focused. And then, of course, you need the key users on the committee. Now, we've got to avoid bias. And key users can be a mixture of experienced people and new people. Remember, the users have got to use this system, so they've got to be involved. How big should a committee be? Well, any committee bigger than one person is going to be a little difficult to handle. So you've got to think about how big the committee is going to be, how big the steering committee is going to be. But you want a diverse committee. That's the thing. And of course, specialized sub-teams. Who's going to do the sprints about inventory? Who's going to make sure the bills of material are right? Who's going to get the master production scheduling process going? All these things, they're very specialized in sub-teams. Steering committee. A good place to start is with an A3. Start with the end in mind. And that, of course, was Leonardo da Vinci, not the bald guy who pinched it. Start with the end in mind. What is our problem? This is the nice thing about the A3, and you put it down very succinctly. Then, overview training for all members. Specialized training for sub-teams, of course, bill of material structuring, cycle counting, that sort of stuff. But overall training for everybody, so they get a picture, because this is an overall system. So, job 1 of the steering committee, project plan, phases and gates, standard engineering practice. We have phases, we have gates, and we come to the end of a phase, we evaluate our progress, and we might call these sprints if we want to, but essentially it's the same idea. You have a phase, you get the job done, the job to be done, and you evaluate at the end of that phase or when the job is being done. You always want to think about death threats and risk mitigation in any project plan. Timeline. If you ask people to do a lot of work without any end in sight, they're not going to do it. So you need milestones and you need end dates. And if you don't do that, nothing gets done. And of course, the first 2 things you've got to do in the steering committee is understand your process. I always use a top-level turtle diagram and value stream mapping. I don't believe you should do any major project without a value stream map. And remember last week we talked about Icarus. Remember? Icarus did not understand his system. Full of joie de vie, he flew up to the sun, melted his wax wings, and all of a sudden is fish food. You've got to understand your system before you try to use it or change it. Don't fall foul of the Icarus paradox. So, top level turtle diagram. This is a truncated version, but at the very top you have the business. What are the inputs to the business and what are the outputs? How do we measure it? All that sort of stuff. Then each process, you analyze each process. The turtle diagram is excellent for this. And of course, all the processes should fit together because the output of one process should be the input to another process. We want a completely structured process in the business. The other thing to do is a value stream map. And this is taken from a value stream map training course called Learning to See. And it's amazing until you do this, how much you do not see. The value stream map allows you to go through the business, find out the non-value added activities, find out where you've got to change. Because one of the things you must be careful of when you're, and we'll talk about this a lot more next week, is you do not institutionalize waste. Just because you've done it the same way since 1937, that does not mean it's the best way to do it. You've got to look at your system. And what is you trying to do in your system? Well, all ERP systems work. But will they work in your environment? We're trying to create a virtual world which is an exact replica of the real world. So we can take decisions on the virtual world which are valid in the real world. So your system must work in your environment. And you must identify what you must do. And we'll talk about this in a few moments. Identify what you must do. It's pointless buying a system which is absolutely fantastic for a manufacturing to stock company, but is absolute rubbish for an engineering to change, engineering to order company. So, a common stumbling block. A stumbling block is some processes that are unique to your business and people insist that they must be done this way. And believe me, I've fallen over this stumbling block. You change things and then all of a sudden you realize that's a daft way to do it. So the first thing, do not institutionalize waste. Use the value stream map to identify any wasteful practices and get rid of them. Do not mechanize garbage, because if you mechanize garbage, this can lead to customization. Do not ever customize a complete system, a complex system. Cut your feet off first. A typical salesperson will claim that customization is easy. Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we can change this. Yeah, we can write that extra bit. Don't be fooled. The road to hell is not paved by good intentions. It's paved by frozen ERP salesmen so little imps can play ice hockey on the way down in the winter. Do not customize, because if you customize a complex system, A, you don't know what the ramifications are throughout the system, and B, you're creating an annuity for the customizers. There's a very powerful technique which is not particularly well known in the smaller business section. It's called TRIZ. TRIZ technique points out that there's nothing unique under the sun. Everything has been addressed by someone. If you look at the Missouri Enterprise website, there's a white paper on TRIZ there, which you may find interesting. The other thing you mustn't do, resist the temptation to buy a Rolls Royce just to drive down the end of the road to pick up the mail. Keep it simple. People have got to use the system to assist their daily work. The system will get rid of all the algorithmic activities to allow people to do the thinking stuff, the heuristic activities. But please resist the temptation to buy a Rolls Royce. So I use the term algorithmic and heuristic tasks. Daniel Pink points this out in his great book. What's an algorithmic task? Algorithmic task. Routine work, data entry. Boring. Let the box in the corner do that. The one with the flashing lights. Heuristic work is creative. This is what you should be hiring people to do. You don't want people just to do mind-bogglingly data entry and Excel spreadsheets and all that sort of nonsense. Apart from the fact it's boring, it's non-value added activity, particularly if you've got a good system. So let's use the ERP system to motivate and excite people, get people to be creative. So think in system selection. How do you do it? There's more ERP systems out there today than there was, I don't know, rock albums in the 60s, and they all seem to come out with the same sort of pace. Use the published literature. Use references from others. Look to the professional bodies. The Association of Supply Chain Management, which I still think of as being APEX, it's a good source for information. Talk to other people who've done it. Select 3 systems then that appear to fit into your manufacturing environment and see if they will. Let's go with that. So the first question is technology the answer? Well, a little bit of British slang. A duck egg is something that's useless. So an effectively implemented ERP system will be an incredibly positive addition to your toolbox, and it will provide an incredible competitive edge. But where are the duck eggs? The things that you don't want. So avoid the duck eggs, please. So some of the advantages of an integrated business system. Get rid of the islands of automation. Get rid of all the redundant data entry. Eliminate silos and have one shop for data, one place for data, so that everybody can look at the data that they need. They don't have to recreate spreadsheets or anything like that. It's all there in one place. Re-engineer, reduce institutionalized waste through the value stream mapping. Re-engineer your process. Establish the best practices. Try and improve the workflow and efficiency. Customer relationships, particularly important if you allow a customer to place orders on your website, or you are advertising that you've got these systems. But of course, don't forget supplier relationship management. In the first webinar in this series where we talked about risk in the supply chain, I talked a lot about the strategic relationship with suppliers, bringing the supplier into your system, into your confidence, into your trust. A good system will allow this. And of course, you want coherent and transparent accountancy practices. You don't want to wait 6 weeks to get the financial results at the end of a period. And another thing which a lot of people don't think about is ad hoc reporting. Of course, all systems have a suite of standard reports. But sometimes you want to know something only once. You want to know, for instance, is a customer still spending the same amount of money on the same products with you? How do you get that information easily? Well, you write an ad hoc report. You may only use it once, but that's a bad advantage of an integrated database system. You can do ad hoc reporting. So, some of the key guiding principles we've got to think about. Accessibility, of course. How many people are going to be using the system at the same time? This impacts the cost. Scalability. And the reason why I emphasize this at the bottom of the screen is if your system is working well, you're going to grow. Your system has got to grow with you. It's pointless buying a system which you'll have to change in 5 years, 10 years. You want a system that will handle planned growth. You want an effective system that'll mirror your business, that'll allow you to take decisions in the real world based upon the information in the virtual world. And of course, efficiency. You don't want people spending hours and hours and hours and hours feeding the computer like a mother bird feeds worms to a little chick. You don't want that. That is not efficient. That's non-value added. Then you've got to think about maintenance and lifetime support. Who is going to maintain your system? Who is going to support your system? Now, one recent example, I have a customer, they want to change their system because they weren't getting the support. It's very important before you decide on a system to make sure that they're going to support you and that they know how to support you. So if they come to you and say, well, we sell you the software, but this consultancy group supports it, then you've got to ask yourself the question, how does a consultancy group keep up to date? And of course, a cost-effective solution. We talked last week about ROI. If it doesn't make you money, don't do it. Look at the return on investment and make sure that the return on investment is linked to the phases in your project plan, so you know if you're on track. Now, at the risk of boring everyone, I'm going to quote a little bit from Robbie Burton's. The best laid plans of mice and men gang after glay and leaders naught but grief and pain for promised joy. Your ERP system can do as much good for you as a little dog with a hat on. We all get excited at the beginning of a project. So what are the stages of a project really if we don't do it right? We all get excited and enthusiastic, and then it doesn't work, and then we find someone to blame, okay? We don't want to do that. We want to avoid the naught but grief and pain for promised joy. Because if we don't, your ERP system will be a money pit. For most organizations, and remember the figures I told you last week, 95% of organizations, the ERP system is a money pit. It costs them a fortune to run it. So think about this. Hands up anyone out there who's recently purchased a new car. Okay? Now, what would have been your reaction if the salesperson had told you that you could get 1,000 miles per gallon of gas? You'd have been delighted, wouldn't you? Way, that's smashing. But then he pointed out that the reason you could get such good mileage was because the car had no wheels. However, hey, you can always push it, yeah? To make it work for you, for a modest charge, you could buy the wheels, but they don't come standard and they have to be changed every year. This is not a frivolous analogy. It happens in the ERP, the IT world every day. We've got to avoid it. So what's the goal? The goal of all this is to create a tool for business success, for business growth, and allow your organization to provide superior customer service. And if it doesn't achieve that, then it's no good. Do something else. So what are some of the general roadblocks to achieving the goal? Lots of top management focus. Remember, management gets what management inspects, not what they expect. Poor project management. Projects often fail because we don't think about the employees, their psychological engagement. Remember, people are the most important thing. A lack of key success factors. a sound strategy that recognizes the business focus rather than the technology process. Do not get attack of the clevers and think of the technology focus. Think of the business focus. Remember, Ollie White kept saying, keep it simple. Then, of course, people institutionalize waste. Hey, we've always done it this way since 1902. We need to change it. We need to customize the system to do it this way. That's a load of baloney. It really is. Do not institutionalize waste. Do not ignore your traditional data. What you're going to do with your legacy data? Are you going to keep it? Are you going to transfer it? If you're going to transfer it, make sure it's right. And I've been in that position before. Dirty data can cause a lot of problems. So, some of the reasons why we have a money pit. Seeing this as a software solution. Fascination with technique. I warn people, do not get fascinated with technique. Forgetting people. Forgetting the daily work. People have still got to do their daily work. Unreal expectations. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And also inadvisable advisors. Ignorance. I'm going to make the point that if you think education and training is expensive, try the cost of ignorance. It's ginormous. The seductive pattern of salesmen. Remember what salesmen are trying to do? They're trying to sell you something. So they promise you the world. My old Scottish great-grandmother was a very pessimistic Highland lady, had a built-in baloney detector. If someone was trying to put something across to her, she would say, oh, he would say the mass if he knew the Latin. You know, don't get seduced by patter. And of course, top management focus. Top management focus. And again, apologies to Aristotle. Management syllogism. We must do something. This is something. Therefore, we must do it. No, you don't, unless it's going to make you money and make your business better. Don't do it. So, let's think about a software solution. This is a tool. The software is a tool. It's just like a lathe or a welder or anything like that. It is a tool to make your business succeed. Make sure that there is no misfit. The computer is not a giant PlayStation, nor, in the good old days, 50 years ago, is it an expensive typewriter, because that's what a lot of computers were. IT sees a solution, the implementation is a solution and an end in itself. It is not. It is a tool. Remember this. If you take anything away from these webinars, an ERP system is a tool to make your business better. So principle number one, the IT department is a support of the driver. Now, good IT support is essential because you really want the technology to work. You know, it's pointless getting everything else right if you have a very slow response time or something like that, because then people don't use it. They've got to ensure that hardware is capable. One little twist that I learned very early on in this was if you go to a vendor site and they want to demonstrate their software to you, then what they'll do is try and do the demonstration over lunchtime. So everything looks super fast. Well, say, no. Let's do it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon so we see what it's really like. You've got to ensure that the hardware is capable. Forgetting people. I keep stressing people because they're the most important thing. User resistance to change. People don't like to change. If people are very happy and confident with something, they don't like change. I mean, I don't like change, and that's my job. Try and institute change. But I don't like change. Nobody likes change. Don't overload people. Asking for more than about 10% over a protracted period is a recipe for disaster. Make sure you have got the people. Don't have too tight an implementation schedule. Do not forget the daily work. passive resistance. Very often, users who do not have a clear concept of the nature and use of an ERP system, and this is where education comes in, they will passively resist. They will pretend to use the computer, pretend to use the system, but they release work, a little black book down here. That's how they release it. I fully remember one time in one of my first factories going into a production controller's office, and I saw along the wall miles and miles of green line flow paper. And I said to him, "Hey Steve, what's all that?" And he said, "Oh, that's the weekly MRP run. Tells us what to make." So I said, "Well, what do you do with it?" And he said, "Oh, I put it against the wall in case we have a nuclear war, and I believe this paper will accept gamma radiation." But I said, "Well, how do you release work on the shop floor?" And he says, "Oh, I've got this little book down here." Don't do it. And then another downside, and perhaps this is a downside of education and training, but it isn't. It's a downside of a level 1, level 2 type management structure. If you have a high turnover of project team members, if you have a successful implementation of an ERP system, news gets about. Your people will be very valuable to other people. So you need to think about your people. So principle number 2, enthusiastic, motivated and well-trained people will make a lousy system fly. This is Ollie White. Ollie focused on people, and that was his strength. So principle number 3, forgetting the daily work. What is the job 1? The job 1 is servicing the customer. Job 2 is implementing a new system. Don't forget the daily work. Unreal expectations. On the right is my Labrador. He's a very clever lad, but he couldn't use an ERP system. Well, he probably wouldn't want to. All he's interested in is getting his meals. Unreal expectations. The new system will pay for itself in 6 months, 12 months. How many times have I heard that? You know, oh, come on, Tom. It'll pay for itself in 12 months. No problem. How? It will increase throughput, reduce inventory and overhead. Yeah? It will force people to work together. Yeah? It'll give people the tools to do their jobs. Yeah? It's intuitive. Your Labrador can run it. How? Big question is how. That's why a good idea is to have an external facilitator, particularly at presentations, because an external facilitator is going to say to the salesman, how will that work? One of the things I always do when I'm introduced to a new system, and I get introduced to new systems virtually once a week, I want to sit down and I want to see how it works. Is it intuitive? Can I see how the strategic plan is developed into a sales and operations plan? How the sales and operations plan does capacity planning, resource requirements planning, how the sales and operations plan is developed into master planning, and how rough good capacity planning is done, how the mass production schedule is translated into the MRP and capacity requirements planning. It's got to be intuitive. You've got to be able to see it. And this is where education and training comes in. Your well-trained people can look at the system and see how it works. So, unreal expectations. Poor knowledge transfer. Management not having a clear understanding of what it will do in their environment. Watch for unreal expectations. So, principle number 4 is know what you are getting. Ignorance, institutionalizing waste, poor quality or lack of business process re-engineering. You cannot afford ignorance in this area. Final analysis, the ERP system is modeling the real physical world. So you can make decisions without having to run out into the stores to check if you've got these parts. The virtual system, virtual world is useless if it does not accurately model the real world. And of course, If the data is garbage, you will get garbage information. You spend mega dollars working around the incorrect data. So, if the data and processes are incorrect, it's all a waste of time. Get the IT department to form an orchestra and play Mozart in the entrance hobby to sort of impress customers and add value. Because if your system evolves or descends into a giant PlayStation, then it's much better off that the IT people are playing Mozart in the entrance lobby. So, inadvisable advisors. You've got to have someone, if you hire someone or get someone involved, who actually know what they're doing. A proven track record. Someone who can work with the users and the steering committee. Someone who can provide training. And this is why an APIC certification is such a valuable asset to anybody who wants to implement this sort of thing. But of course, they must be neutral. If you have an outsider comes in and they have biases towards a particular system, that bias will be reflected in your selection. So your advisors need to be neutral. You must have a detailed test plan and implementation schedule. Of course, it's all circled around the value stream map, highlighting wasteful practices. You know, the great Rudyard Kipling, in one of his poems, he says, if you can walk with crowds and keep your virtue, talk with kings and not lose the common touch. This is what an advisor should be able to do. Against an inadvisable advisor, somebody who's learning the system at your expense. Personality conflicts. Solution bias. Do not bring anybody in who comes in, oh, yeah, we use SAP and it was great. I want to do that now. And then the cost. You get what you pay for sometimes. So the moral is, do not get a manicurist to perform brain surgery. A manicurist may be able to use scissors, but they're not brain surgeons. So only hire consultants who can speak your business language. Unreal expectations. Start with the end in mind. Have a sensible and objective time frame. It's going to take you time to do it. And a really good, well-run implementation, it can take about 18 months. Avoid the mistake Captain Smith made with the Titanic. Data cleansing. What are you going to do with the legacy data? If you've got a well-established company and you've got data going back years and years and years and years, what are you going to do with it? And if you decide to transfer all your data, you've got to make sure that the data is correct. Value stream management, of course, making sure that you eliminate the waste in your value stream. And then education and training at all levels. If you think education and training are expensive, try the cost of ignorance. It'll sink you. A good place to start with everybody is the APIC's Introduction to Enterprise Resource Planning. And this is a list of the items that are covered. It's not a long course. It's quite a top-level course, but it allows you to give your people an idea of what reality is. And of course, I don't expect you to know this right off from the slides, and you can get copies of any of these slides from your area business manager if you contact him, and they'll be glad to give you it. So principle number 7, no system will match your business exactly. No system, however clever, will match your business exactly, because your business is unique in many ways. Although they all obey the same laws, just as an F-35 and a Boeing Dreamliner obeys the same laws of physics. But you do different things differently. So it's critical to comprehensively identify what you need very early in the selection process and what you can change. So, a system health check. Contact your ABM to acquire the Missouri Enterprise System Health Checklist. This checklist allows you to highlight the critical requirements of your business. So, re-emphasizing the seductive pattern of salesfolk. You've got to ask yourself, this salesman standing up there, and he's got a presentation, which is canned, of course. What's his job? To sell you a product. I fully remember the first presentation I attended of AutoCAD when I was in design in the aerospace. This is a long, long time ago. And the salesman wanted to show us how to make bicycles. And we were all sitting around saying, well, we make aeroplanes. Yeah, but this is how you make a bicycle. Baloney. They'll say the massive thing, you're the Latin. The product may comprise hardware, software, services, such as training and implementation. And really, you want the company selling you the system to do the training and implementation. And again, beware of customization, because iron parites is not gold. Whatever the salesperson might say. Don't be deluded. Keep asking why. This is Missouri, the show me state, yeah? They'll keep saying, well, show me how it does that. Show me. How does it do that? So, top management support. Overriding principle. Without top management buying active support, nothing will get done. Management gets what they inspect, not what they expect. So how can top management maintain focus? Well, to misquote Kipling again, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs, you probably don't understand the problem. The overriding principle is make sure top management do not lose focus. So, what are we doing? Implementation phases, and we're going to talk about this much more detail next week. Design and planning, implementation, stabilizing the business so people know what to do, because people are not going to sit down and immediately know what to do, however intuitive the system may be. Continual improvement. You need a system which is scalable and allow continual improvement and transformation. So each phase should be planned with an objective view at the end of each phase. The phase and gate system, the standard engineering system. So, why partner with Missouri Enterprise? Well, we've got depth of experience, business ethics, business experience. We've got pretty good implementation teams. The people who implement the ERP systems have all held C-level positions, all certified by the American Production and Inventory Control Society. So we do have a fairly broad and deep area of expertise. Missouri Enterprise is cost effective. So the focus is adding value, not screwing you down for money. Okay? Our important impact, our metric is impact dollars. So that's what we focus on. So how do we do it? Well, with people, culture, preeminence. The iceberg, 2/3 of it is underwater, and this is what we've got to think about. The system is that thing at the top that you can see. The people are the stuff at the bottom. So, the output from the steering committee. Evaluation of current systems. The result is a formally agreed requirements document. And for every demonstration, you need a going to market document, which documents each presentation and the team's evaluation. Let's talk about the system requirements document. It's a comprehensive document for internal and external use. This is our system. It's the guy putting on the safety equipment. The system requirements document should be the main output of the steering committee. So what's in it? Overview of the business, of course. The scope and purpose of the change. Death threats and risk. And then as is analysis and the reasons for change. Timeline. And internally, you would include a budget. But of course, the system requirements document, you're going to send that out to potential vendors. So you don't want to put a budget in there. And finally, the last page of every system requirements document I help produce is a consensus page. I get everybody to sign it so that 6 months down the road, nobody can come back and say, hey, I didn't agree with that. Oh, yes, you did. Here it is. You signed it. System requirements document, vital. The next document is a going to market book. You complete this after each presentation by each steering committee member. And this is the parameters for your system selection. And of course, it includes a vendor analysis questionnaire because the vendor is a supplier. So a vendor should be analyzed and evaluated just as any other supplier in your business. So in conclusion, before I hand back to Jeff, I remember my old shop instructor at school saying, measure twice, cut once. The only use for duck eggs is to make omelettes. And that's a rather nice omelette picture, I must admit. Jeff, would you like to wrap up, please?
Great, thank you, Tom. First, I guess, do we have any questions at all for Tom? I guess, Tom, maybe next week you'll talk a little bit about maybe a system that you implemented and what was good and made it great as far as the implementation process and how that team worked together to do that. So I think that would be something that you could help us talk about next week. So hopefully you'll join us next week. We are going to do implementing the ERP system and continue and final our series on the ERP web series. So a bridge over troubled waters. So that'll be next Thursday, September 23rd, 2021, 11 to noon. If you have any questions for Tom, please reach out to him. Also, our ABMs are available. You can find those on our website at MissouriEnterprise.org, and be happy to help you connect and get with Tom or have any other questions you guys might have for us. And thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next week in our next event. Thank you, guys. It's going to be posted. We do have a survey, actually. It's going to be posted on our chat, so if you could fill that out, it'll be in our chat now. You can select that link and follow that, and it should only take you 5 or 10 minutes to get that filled out. So please follow that, and we can also follow up with an email on that too. Thank you, everybody.